Hello, divine creations, divine marvels, children of God. Thank you so very much for dropping by this video. To anyone who's new, this channel is dedicated to the exploration of what's the difference between actual and authentic non-duality and nonsense, neo-non-duality, often called Neo-Advaita. Before I hop into anything, I would like to make a request of you. Please listen to what I say to the extent that you can have an intellectual understanding of what I'm saying. But please do not blindly believe anything I say. Find out for yourself what is true. And at the end of this video, I intend to offer some ways for you to do that. And please don't believe anything that anyone says, especially if they claim to be teaching non-duality. So, without further ado, when I'm not here doing this, something else I do vocationally is I teach the spiritual path of Christ. You could say Jesus, the teachings of Christ, the path of Christ without Christianity. Think of all the yucky parts of Christianity, take those out, and what you're left with is a beautiful spiritual path of love, of worship, of being of service, of finding divinity within oneself, being connected to God, being guided by God. And so that's what I teach, or one of the things I do when I'm not here doing this. And I had a very interesting experience while offering a live stream teaching on that. Had a Neo-Advaita person show up. This was not someone I had interacted with before, but it became very clear very quickly that they were very steeped in Neo-Advaita and that they actually wanted to teach me some Neo-Advaita in the middle of a live stream on a completely different topic. And in reflecting on this, it really has highlighted for me a couple of things. One, Neo-Advaita is a religion. Two, it's demonic. So I'd like to share a little bit what I mean by demonic. You know, when we think of demons, we think of the devil, and most of us have heard of demons from a Christian point of view. However, in Vedic thought, it's like Vedic thought 101. There are beings that are not in bodies that are trying to help us, and there are beings that are not in bodies that are trying to harm us. And the main form of harm is to take us off the spiritual path, to keep us away from God. Now, this is all held within the context of this beautiful, glorious, yet very painful, but glorious game that God plays. And there's different schools of philosophy as to why this is and what the mechanics are of it, but it's Vedic thought 101, including traditional Advaita 101. There are helpful beings that we can receive help from, and there are evil beings, and they're called asuras, the harmful beings, which is a fancy way of saying demons, but not quite, because in Vedic thought, even the demons are inherently divine. It's just been covered over very deeply, which is very fascinating to think about. So, how is Neo-Advaita a religion? Now that we have some definition, and what I mean by religion is a formula, and a formula that says this is the only way. So now that we have our definitions in place, a religion and demonic, how is Neo-Advaita a demonic religion? Well, first, the religion. Neo-Advaita is a formula. This formula has all sorts of nuances, but there's two main parts to this formula. One of the main parts of the formula is you're already enlightened, so there's nothing to do. I call that Neo-Advaita because it's so far removed from actual Advaita Vedanta. The other main part of the formula is just practice self-inquiry. That's all you need to do. Now, for the first kind, there's nothing to do since you're already enlightened there's usually this little thing of like, you just need to see that. So there is this little doing, but effort and meditation are highly discouraged. Whereas in the second type of Neo-Advaita, it's like, just do this one spiritual practice. So those are the two main themes, and there are other kind of sub-themes that show up. But it's just a formula. In the end, it comes down to a formula. It can be easily memorized. And as I've shared, early on in my Neo-Advaita career, I fancied myself a teacher, and I would go on discussion forums and I would type. It's like I would hear the things in satsang, and then I would just type them, and then people would be like, wow, that's so clear. I wasn't enlightened. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just repeating. I was just regurgitating the formula. I've often said that if you gave me a professional actor or actress, and you gave me maybe an hour and a half, I could coach them in such a way that they could put on a show and convince people that they were enlightened. Because Neo-Advaita, like religion, is just a show. And that show is just a formula. Just as a Christian will always fall back to, not all, but most, the Bible is perfectly true. Jesus is the only way to salvation. Accept Jesus in your heart. A Neo-Advaita teacher will always fall back to either you are the self, you're already free, or just practice self-inquiry. And then from that formula, the Christians have all sorts of nuances they share, and Neo-Advaita people have all sorts of nuances they share. But if you back them into a corner, they'll always go back to that formula, and everything they say or do is pointing people towards accepting that formula. You could say surrendering to that formula. So with all that said, as I start off this video, I had a Neo-Advaita, I don't think they're quite a teacher, came on another one of my broadcasts. And I was talking about good and evil in the mystical Christian perspective, which is very different than the worldly definition of good or evil. And so this person wrote, maybe we can say ego mind or personality is evil, and what we already truly are, true self, is God. So that's classic Neo-Advaita right there, to say that the mind or the ego, so they were using my words in this case, they were saying evil in a spiritual context. In most Neo-Advaita, they'll say ego, mind, or personality is an illusion, doesn't exist, is bad, is something you have to get rid of. Of course, traditional Advaita doesn't teach that at all. Traditional Advaita teaches this process of refining the ego. Traditional Advaita doesn't even use the word ego, but ego, mind, or personality, refining those things are actually instruments through which we function and through which the divine shows up and plays its part in the world. Neo-Advaita, that's what traditional Advaita says. Neo-Advaita wants to just eliminate them. They don't exist, or they're bad, or in this case, like this person said, they're evil, or we can see them as evil. And then again, this person said, and what we already truly are, true self, is God. So a traditional Advaita teacher would never say, I am God, or you are God. It's a very nuanced and philosophical topic. And traditional Advaita starts with this sense of humility and surrendering to God. So it's very hard to say, I am God and I surrender to myself. It doesn't really work. On top of all of this, traditional Advaita has this very interesting triangle of Brahman, ultimate reality, Jiva, the individual, and Ishvara, the creator of the universe. Now, I just made a mistake. I put Brahman above. So let's just say Brahman, Ishvara, the creator of the universe, and Jiva, individual. Now, in Advaita teaching, in the ultimate sense, these three things are not different from each other. Individual, creator of the universe, and Brahman, the supreme consciousness. So that's the traditional Advaita teaching. But the way to get there is very subtle, and saying, I am God, or my true self is God, no traditional Advaita teacher would ever say that. Because in traditional Advaita, there's this understanding that yes, the individual is identical with the creator, yet they fulfill different roles. It's a very nuanced topic, and I don't feel qualified to go much more deeper into it. But those who would like to go deeper into it, I would recommend a beautiful book called Tattva Bodha. I'm going to put it in the chat box. And by Swami Dian Ananda. So this is a classical Advaita text with commentary by a highly respected Advaita teacher, one of the most highly respected of the 20th century. So right off the bat, so when this person said this, personality, ego mind, evil, true self is God, I was like, okay, I'm dealing with someone who has been indoctrinated into Neo-Advaita. You can contrast Neo-Advaita with how Ramana Maharshi actually taught. Ramana Maharshi talked on a wide spectrum of topics. If you read the book Day by Day with Bhagavan, you'll see that he talked about everything. He talked about philosophy. He talked about literature. He talked about our true nature. He talked about self-inquiry. He talked about Ayurveda, Indian medicine. He talked about bhakti. He talked about surrender. He covered a wide range of topics. Yes, he focused in on self-inquiry, but not in the way that you will experience in a Neo-Advaita satsang. In a Neo-Advaita satsang, it's just kind of repeating and regurgitating the same thing over and over. That's how I was able to spot this person, because that's not the core message, but it's very close to the things that get repeated in a Neo-Advaita satsang. So I let the person know, well, that's not actually what I'm teaching. And so as a particular Christian mystic who I was teaching on, his name's Bruno Grinny, I was like, well, Bruno teaches it differently. And here's what Bruno teaches on the topic. And this person continues. Or just be. Being the one. Dropping the thinking part, parentheses, not the practical mind. So not the splitting off as being an individual. This is one way to spot a Neo-Advaita person. They can't tolerate a spiritual teaching that's different than theirs. They will always try and move you into their belief system. Now, this is very different than traditional Advaita. Traditional Advaita meets the individual where they are. I was recently talking with a traditional Advaita teacher, and I said, this philosophical idea, that idea, I don't know about that. And she said, we're not even going to talk about that right now. Right now, we're going to focus on some of the basics, because she was meeting me where I was. I've shared this story many times. I went to a local temple here, and I didn't know it, but there's a traditional and somewhat famous, not huge, but very well respected Advaita guru who runs that temple. And after there was a traditional ceremony, and afterwards he just sat in a chair and let people come up to him to talk to him one-on-one. He didn't give a big talk, because big talks are always going to be formulas, right? Because you can't meet the person where they are. And the first thing he said to me is, after we introduced ourselves, the first thing he said to me, do you have any family? He wanted to get to know me. He wanted to get to know about my life. Do you have any family? How long have you been in the area? What kind of work do you do? So that he could meet his teaching to me. Neo-Advaita tries to make and any religion tries to squeeze you into the teaching. That's why I say it's not even really a teaching. It's a formula. It's kind of like a cookie cutter, right? A cookie cutter, you flatten out the dough, and then every cookie comes out the same. That's what religion is, and that's what Neo-Advaita is. It doesn't meet the person where they are. It's a formula. So back to this person's comment. So I shared, the Christian mystic I was sharing on, his name's Bruno Grinny. He has very clear teachings that I'm very well trained in and practiced in for a long time. So I just said, well, here's what Bruno teaches. But that wasn't okay with this person because, again, they have a formula that they are trying to impose. And again, it's really funny that they showed up. They knew, like, this is a particular teaching, a particular approach, and they came in and they basically tried to be a teacher. It's kind of comical. Again, here was their next comment. Or just be. Being the one. Dropping the thinking part, not the practical mind. So not splitting off as being an individual. So again, this is just basic Neo-Advaita. Here's the teaching. Just be. Of course, they have a weird voice. That's how, when Neo-Advaita teachers give this teaching, they're like, just be. Like it's the deepest statement in the universe. Or being the one. Dropping the thinking part. So all of those teachings, not splitting off and being an individual. So all of those teachings are great teachings for in the moment, but they're not sustainable teachings. Traditional Advaita says that before you engage, and so to just be or to let go of the mind. So traditional Advaita would never advise to let go of the mind. That's an insane teaching. I could do a whole video on that, and maybe I will. But this idea of just being. So traditional Advaita is foundational idea is doing your dharma. Your dharma is your duty. Your duty involves family, finances, relationships, service. So this teaching to just be, Neo-Advaita teachers love to put it out there as the be-all to end-all. Like, if you just be, everything will be fine. And on a certain extent, that's true, but almost none of us can practice this. And Ramana Maharshi would say things like that. So traditional Advaita is based on preparation to get you to the place where you can just be. Neo-Advaita loves to jump the gun. It loves to offer teachings that are impossible. Who can drop the mind? All of us can drop the mind for a second. Those of us who are really disciplined can maybe drop it for 40 seconds, maybe more like 15 seconds. So it's an absurd teaching, drop the mind. It's a classic Neo-Advaita teaching. And it sets people up to fail. And then it creates this whole loop of, well, the teacher said to drop the mind, and I dropped the mind, and I was peaceful for 15 seconds or a minute, but then the mind came back, so I dropped it, and then I was peaceful, and that felt so good, but then it came back. So what do? Okay, I just dropped the mind. It creates this weird loop. And that's why you'll hear people. I went to one Neo-Advaita satsang for a very long time. I heard this one guy pretty much ask the same question for 15, if you don't like swearing, cover your ears, for 15 fucking years. The same fucking question over and over. And the teacher would give the same, again, cover your ears if you're easily offended, the same bullshit answer. The person would say something along the lines of, when I sit in meditation, it's easy to be aware of the self. But when I'm out and about in the world, I lose that awareness of the self. And that it was always some variation on that. Again, 15 years, this person asked the same question. And they would usually give this long talk of like, I was feeling really deeply immersed in the self, and then this happened, or when I go to work, or there was always a little backstory, but it's always the same issue. And the teacher would always say, the self is always the self. If you turn your attention away from and I'm imitating their voice, if you turn your attention away from objects and immerse yourself in the self, you will realize that you always are, and nothing can obscure that, or something to that effect. Again, pardon your ears. And I'm a little angry about this, so I'm gonna raise the volume a little bit. For 15 fucking years, all the teacher was trying to do was squeeze the person into a formula. No more, no less. And this poor guy thought this teacher was enlightened and could help him. I mean, now I got some of that anger, frustration out. It brings tears to my eyes. Brings tears to my eyes. And so again, this person said, dropping the thinking part so that not splitting off and being as an individual. That is very dualistic. Neo-Advaita hates individuality. It hates it. Says it's evil. It doesn't exist. You need to get rid of it. Traditional Advaita says individuality is one with God. There's no separation. So Neo-Advaita ends up being dualistic. It's very ironic and sends you on a fool's quest. You can't get rid of individuality. You can't get rid of the mind. Traditional Advaita teaches you to not identify with the mind. And please don't try and do this on your own. Find a guru, a traditional teacher. I'm not a guru. I'm currently not qualified to do that. But if you want to learn the art of disidentifying with your mind, which is what traditional Advaita teaches, then find a traditional teacher. These YouTube gurus are not qualified. 99% of them, maybe there's a couple genuine. I've seen one or two genuine out of hundreds of fake ones. I've seen one or two genuine ones who will meet one-on-one with students. I've got some links on my webpage to genuine Advaita teachers. So this person said more, but I feel like that's plenty for today. We focused more today on the religious aspect, and I think I intend to do a follow-up video where I focus on the demonic aspect. So, Pat, glad you found it interesting. Thank you so much for dropping by, beautiful souls. I wish you a wonderful day. And so I said at the beginning, I would offer you some ways to find out if what I'm saying is true or not. So I've already given you one, is the book Day by Day with Bhagavan, which is available online for free. If you read that, you'll see that what and how Ramana Maharshi taught completely different from how Neo-Advaita teachers teach. The other ways are to study the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, and the, what's the third book? I haven't thought of it in a while, excuse me. The Brahma Sutras. The Brahma Sutras are very hard to read. As are the Upanishads. I would advise people to start with the Bhagavad Gita. These are the three foundational texts of Advaita Vedanta. If you read them, they're the best defense against Neo-Advaita, because Neo-Advaita will take one or two sentences out of these texts, and then they will attack and criticize. It's like they'll take 1% and they'll use that 1% to attack and criticize the other 99%. I consider this one of the best defenses. I mean, the best defense is to find a traditional guru. The second best defense is to against Neo-Advaita and to recover from Neo-Advaita is to study these texts. And I would recommend starting with the Bhagavad Gita. And you will see it is night and day different. Night and day different. But you'll see little pieces of Neo-Advaita teachings. Again, they just take little bits. On my website, I have a list of traditional Advaita teachers. I have a list of some articles and some videos that can help you on this recovery journey. If you feel you've benefited from my work, I very much appreciate when people send donations. I currently just do this out of a desire to help and be served. And if you feel that you've been helped or served and you'd like to contribute to my well-being, very much appreciate that. And there's no pressure for that, only if it feels right. And one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this topic is because Neo-Advaita is like a mind maze that's hard to get out of. And then once you get out, there's all these people who are going to try and get you back in. So here I was just giving a talk on the mystical teachings of Christ, and a Neo-Advaita, I don't think they were quite a teacher, but they came in and they did some teaching. They tried to hook me back in. If I believed any of their nonsense, the ego mind or personality is evil, what we truly are is God, that's delusion number 2 they shared. Number 3, the spiritual teaching just be. Number 4, being the one. 5, dropping the thinking mind. 6, so that you don't split off as an individual. So those teachings, maybe next time I'll get into more of why they're demonic. I'll give a little preview. They're demonic because they sound true and they have some truth in them. They'll give you a temporary taste of God, and then they'll take you further into suffering. I know this from my personal experience, and I know this from talking to a lot of people who've been tricked. I call it false light, because what is a demon? A demon usually doesn't show up as a demon. A demon normally shows up as an angel. That's how they get people. So that's a little preview of coming attractions. And so I'm so passionate about this because the spiritual world is becoming more and more saturated with Neo-Advaita. So I want to stay strong so I don't fall for the bullshit. But also, I just have, it took me so long to get out. It took me almost I got involved in Neo-Advaita in 1999. I exited it in 2018, 2019. I forget the exact date. I think it was 2019. And then I really didn't begin. I began recovering, but I didn't. And I can't say I haven't recovered from the effects, but at this point I can say I have recovered from Neo-Advaita. It means it's not God will, I've just cleansed it from me. There's still a lot of negative impacts that I'm still in the process of healing, but I don't believe Neo-Advaita has any hooks in me anymore. It can still sort of trigger me or upset me, but as soon as I hear Neo-Advaita nonsense, I start to feel sick. So I share all this to say it was a very long, gradual, challenging process. So I do these videos because I want to help people, but I do these videos to keep myself strong because Neo-Advaita is also addictive. And the demons constantly, whatever your theology, whether it's more Christian or whether it's more Hindu or even Buddhist, and the Buddhist theology has the Maras, the demons, the devils, the tempters. Until you're fully liberated, the demons are always going to try and pull you back in. So thank you. This person said, can yoga be considered demonic? I mean, anyone. So I should say, I consider Neo-Advaita demonic. Whether or not it is or not, you're going to have to find out for yourself. I consider it demonic, and I gave you my definition of demonic, is twofold. That which seeks to separate one from God or goodness. And I'm not talking here in Christian theology. It may sound it, but again, in Vedic Hindu traditional Advaita theology, the Maras are the demon. There are demons. They're just called asuras. And that which appears true but is actually false. Now, in Vedic theology, as I said, the demons are inherently divine, and they actually fundamentally are an expression of the power of God, and hence it's considered a play. That's a very deep topic. I don't consider yoga demonic. Certainly fundamentalist Christians do. So when I say demonic, I have a very specific meaning in mind. That which appears to be moving you towards God, but is actually taking you deeper into suffering. And I'm going to talk more about that in the next video on this topic. So thank you so much for dropping by. And I wish everyone a good day of, you're welcome, Pat. Thank you for your feedback and your question. And I wish everyone a beautiful day of recovering from Neo-Advaita and finding a valid and true path. Many blessings.